Welcome to the Gentleman Project Podcast. I'm Cory Moore.
I'm Kirk Chugg. Today we have Jamison Spencer on the podcast. Jamison and I have known each other for probably about 4 years. He moved into my neighborhood and he immediately sent out a message and he says, I'm a dentist, but don't call me if your kid has a toothache. He's a dentist that doesn't practice dentistry. He teaches other dentists how to be successful and how to run their business and have a fulfilling life in the profession that they're in. He runs a world-renowned mastermind for dentists, and people fly in from all over the world to come in and learn from Jamison. Jamison is one of the guys that I know who knows the Atomic Habits book and its principles the best. So we're excited to talk about that because if you listened to the podcast last week, you know Cory just finished it. I finished it the month before. So we're both implementing these things into our lives right now, and it's been great. Jamison's got a great family. We're excited to hear about them and about the things that he's currently teaching. So welcome to the podcast this morning, Jamison.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your family first.
Sure.
And what it looks like so people can kind of understand what the makeup of your family is.
Sounds good. So we have my wife, Jennie, and I have been married 31 years now, I believe, this year. It'd be 32 this year, I believe. No.
You better get that right.
Take that back.
I know your wife.
Let me think about that because it is 31 this year. Yeah, we were married in 91, so that would be 31.
Yeah.
Because we were going to do this huge trip last year for our 30th. I had July all booked out. We're going to do a month-long cruise in
awesome.
Europe, and it was basically canceled because of COVID stuff. So, so we didn't.
Well, you don't even look old enough to be married that long.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Seriously. Yeah. But so we married in 91. We have 6 children. We have one daughter. Our daughter Jazzy is our oldest, and then we have 5 boys, twin boys. So our second and third, we went straight from 1 child to 3 children. So we never had that man-on-man defense type of thing. Went straight to zone. So then after 3, as they say, you can have as many as you want. So we ended up having 3 more after those 3. Have 6 kids. Little thing on that too is we went to dental school with our daughter Jazzy. And then had the twins during the second year of dental school, which won't mean anything to anyone unless they're a dentist. But that's basically the hardest year of dental school by a lot, which says nothing about me. It just means my wife is amazing because she was basically a single parent to have those twins and whatnot. And also for our community there, that was pretty awesome. So that's it. Our kids too, just a little fun fact. So I'm Jamison Ross Spencer and my wife is Jennifer Ruth Spencer. And so we just went with that theme. So all of our kids are JRs. Yeah. Jaslyn Ruth, Jacob and Joshua Ross. And then, Jack Remington, Jefferson Reagan, and Jared Rockwell. So all
those
of
are good names.
JRS.
I like the 2 names too. Like a lot of your kids' names sound like Hollywood's, stars or something.
And I get that a lot. With the Jamison Spencer, it's constantly being confused of which is my first name, Spencer or Jamison.
Well, they're good kids, and so I'm kind of excited to learn from you today. I've had the chance to get to know and interact with your younger kids.
Yeah.
When you moved into the neighborhood, your older kids were already out of the house. You've got good kids, and it seems like you've taught them a lot of good principles at the time that you've been their dad.
Yeah.
So I'm anxious for you to share some of the wisdom of some of the things that you've taught them. And I think you did a little homework too with your kids.
Yeah.
And ask them a couple of questions about being a dad and being raised by you, things that they learned. So would you share some of the things that they shared with you?
Sure. So I asked my kids the other day, knowing that I was going to be on the podcast here, some of the things that I had, if there was a book that I'd recommended or anything like that had stuck out to them. And my children also, you should know, my oldest 4 are integral parts of my business. My daughter Jazzy has been with me in what's called Spencer Study Club. That's our online mentoring group that we do, our online education thing for dentists, teaching them about sleep apnea and TMJ problems. She's been part of that from the beginning. She was always into photography and things like that. So when we started doing that, she learned a lot more about videography, about editing. And so she's been part of that business for the 6+ years we've been doing it. My twins, when they got back from serving their missions, they thought about going to dentistry. which I was flattered, but I was also like, you know, your dad's not a real dentist, right? And you want my lifestyle is what you want. You don't want to be a dentist because you don't even know what that means. They started going to college and whatnot, and I kind of steered them towards marketing. And now that's what they do. So they own a marketing company. They work with a lot of the dentists that I work with, and have become very, very good marketers in their own right, doing SEO and websites, but then also just helping people with marketing. So all of my kids, and my son Jack now is also involved in the business. He actually works in our practice in Taylorsville. So I have a practice there that is limited to sleep apnea and TMJ problems, and Jack's working in that. So some of the books, like Josh said, Extreme Ownership. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that.
It's a great one.
Great one.
So all of these books too, by the way, are books that I use in my mastermind working with the dentist. And then I always buy extra ones because I'll research it and I'll be like, hey, this is good for everyone, not just these dentists I work with. So I give them all to my kids. So Extreme Ownership.
And you probably have some of the principles that you teach in that book, you internalize, and then it becomes part of your family culture.
Correct.
And they see that. So
that's right.
That's awesome.
That's right. And it's nice for them to get it from those other sources too, rather than just like, well, yeah, dad is saying this or whatever. Like as a matter of fact, we talked a little bit before we're getting started here that my wife and I have had some training with Tony Robbins, and we would bring that up a lot with the kids. And I think my daughter actually would sometimes be like, hey, don't Tony Robbins me, right? Like, that kind of deal. So we like them to get some of these principles from themselves. My son Josh too, like a quote, I don't know where I got this from, who said this originally, but a quote that he took to heart was, never let school get in the way of your education. And that's been a principle of mine forever. I travel a ton for speaking, so I get invited to speak a lot of places. And I remember distinctly once wanting to take one of my kids, I think it was Jack, to Washington, D.C., because I was going to be speaking at something in Washington, D.C. And the school said, well, yeah, he can't miss those days. And I was like, yeah, forget you. Like, so he can be at school in Boise, basically learning about U.S. history, for example, or I could take him to Washington, D.C. Right. Go to the Smithsonian and stuff like. Yeah, I'll take the check mark there on the missed attendance. I'm not worried about that. Jack enjoyed Atomic Habits himself. He's also reading Deep Work, which he just found. I actually told my son Jack, so he's in college right now, but he's kind of struggling with the direction and some of the things that are happening in college he's not really thrilled with. And I'm like, well, dude, come into my library. I got what cost me at least $150,000, if not more, in here. And it's all yours, right? I can walk you through it, stuff like that. So he's taking that to heart. My daughter, Jazzy.
You do have a pretty extensive library.
Well, again, and it's cost a lot to put all that stuff together. My daughter just said, she said, I think the biggest impact you had on me growing up was pushing me to try new things, proving to me, whether I liked it or not, that I could literally accomplish just about anything. And that's true. My daughter's style was always the like, no, I can't, so skiing or something like that was always a struggle. Driving, I had to force her to get her driver's license, right? And however, working her through that, she's now has a mindset more of like, well, I can do it. I've done hard things before. I can do it again.
It's great. Everybody hopes they teach their kids something like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the sleep apnea thing?
I'd love to.
I think a lot of people have that problem. My wife has a really hard time sleeping, actually. And, for those listeners, we haven't talked about that. It'd be nice to understand, like, what are the signs and how can we as parents, friends, whatever, help those that are in that situation?
Well, I really appreciate you asking that, because as the research I've done on your podcast here, you're focusing on fatherhood, you're focusing on things like that. And so this past weekend, I had a group of dentists in, and it was a celebration for what the work they did in 2021. And we had a big party in Sundance, basically. And as part of that, I also asked them to put together some pearls of wisdom to share with the group. And one of them, who happened to also be one of our winners of this contest, he talked about learning about sleep apnea in his practice. He's a dentist in South Dakota. And at the end of his remarks, he mentioned that he wished he could have learned these things earlier because he's positive now, knowing what he knows now, that his father passed away related to sleep apnea. And his dad died when he was 48.
Oof.
So I love the approach to fatherhood and what we can do to help our kids and whatnot. And the main thing that we can do is not die. You know what I'm saying? So
Keep them safe.
Dying early, that will kind of suck for all of us. And this sleep apnea thing is something that is missed all the time. And it's not just in men. So our physician colleagues really, if you go and talk to most doctors and say, yeah, you know, what do you know about sleep apnea? They will say, well, that's a problem for fat old men. Like that is the focus. So if you're a fat old man, you can get diagnosed with sleep apnea. If you're a fat old man and you go to your doctor and say, hey, you know, I'm having a hard time sleeping, I'm snoring, my wife says I choke every once in a while, they're going to say, you have sleep apnea. Let's get a study and prove it. However, if you're any of us sitting here, if they're any of our wives, if you're not a fat old man, if you're a kid, it's going to get missed unless you happen to connect with the people who know better. Okay. And that's the, what we do in our practice, but our practice is treating people for the most part. So like I said, we have a practice in Taylorsville, and our practice is really focused on people who have already been diagnosed with sleep apnea, tried the CPAP machine. You may be familiar with that. That's a mask, right? So it's a mask and it's a great treatment, but a lot of people can't stand it. They just can't stand to wear that thing. And so they give up. Like almost 50% of people put on CPAP will give up at a year. And we treat those people. And we make a dental device that they wear. It's very simple to wear. It's covered by medical insurance. And that's really the focus of our practice. However, most of my teaching is to general dentists and helping them recognize you go in to get your teeth cleaned and they notice you've got some wear on your teeth, for example. You've been grinding your teeth. Well, for years, we just blamed that on stress. You know, people grind their teeth because of stress. Well, now we believe that some people will clench and grind their teeth to try to protect their airway so they don't die. So it's what I call the stress of suffocating to death, which is pretty stressful. And we'll just very simply, so for example, here, let me give you a couple things. If you snore, then that's a big check in the you might have sleep apnea. If your bed partner has ever said that you stop breathing, you for sure have sleep apnea. And this is also, it goes both ways. However, for the most part, women are a million times better at picking this up than men are. Your wife might say, yes, you stop breathing, 27 times an hour, and she'd be probably right. On the other hand, a guy might just be more like, well, my wife snores. Okay, it won't be very specific. So whenever I have a man tell me that their wife says, my wife says that I stop breathing, that dude for sure has sleep apnea. The other way around, for women, if they snore and they are fatigued, if they are don't have energy like they used to, sometimes even things are misdiagnosed as insomnia, and it's a different type. So there's the insomnia of I can't get to sleep because my brain won't turn off. That's different. And then there's the other insomnia that affects a lot of women, more so than men, but it can affect men too. And this is the type where you're sleeping fine and you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't go back to sleep. That is more an adrenaline rush, probably from you suffocating to death. So your brain eventually says, hey, dude, wake up because this isn't good. We all know that sleep is really, really important for all sorts of great things that we do. But what do you think your brain thinks is more important? A good night's sleep or air? Okay, air clearly trumps all. So all of these things that happen, your brain's going to be like, yeah, forget that. Let's go ahead and just breathe and we'll figure out. So for women, they'll get diagnosed with depression. They'll get diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, even things like fibromyalgia and whatnot, and TMJ problems. So TMJ problems are highly related to this. A lot of the patients that come into our practice with a TMJ problem, we evaluate them, think they might have sleep apnea, refer them to our sleep medicine colleagues. They'll do a sleep study. Sure enough, they'll get diagnosed with sleep apnea. They'll get treated for their sleep apnea, and their TMJ problem will get better without any treatment directed at the TMJ problem.
Interesting.
In kiddos, and we talk about that real quick, this is like someplace I'm really passionate about, although I don't treat kids. So my passion is in getting them diagnosed. And personal story. So my fifth child, Jefferson, who Kirk knows. And he's a, pretty big strapping lad now and stuff like that. And when he was in first grade, he starts going to school and he was just struggling, right? And it's a couple weeks into school and we get a call for my wife and I to come visit with the principal and the first grade teacher. Okay, like I said, this is child 5 of 6. So I know at this point in my parenting career that if you're getting called in the first couple of weeks of school, it's not to give your child a humanitarian award, right? Something up.
Weird going on.
So I suspected it was going to be on the academic line, and sure enough, and they say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Spencer, Jefferson's just, he's such a sweet boy, but he's just not at the same level as these other kids. And I knew that because this is child 5 of 6, right? And he wasn't reading the same level of our other kids at that age. He couldn't remember things the same way. Again, a very, very, very sweet little boy, but just not gifted in that way as my other children. And he's coming also from his brother Jack, who was very quick to read and excellent in all of those sorts of things. And then there's Jeff. I'll never forget when he would go to church and the little kids are singing songs, and there'd be 2 and 3 year olds that are just sitting there singing their lungs out, and he would just be standing there. Well, and at 4, 5, 6 years old, he's just standing there. Well, how come? Because he couldn't remember the words, and these other little kids could. So at the end of that talk with the teacher, they even suggested, you might get him tested for ADHD. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back that made me finally realize, oh my gosh, does my kid have sleep apnea? Now, as we've established at this point, this is all I do for a living. Mm-hmm. I treat people with sleep. I lecture around the world on sleep apnea. I missed it in my own child. So 2 days after that call, he's in getting a sleep study. And sure enough, he had sleep apnea. It was pretty bad for a kid. So we got his tonsils out, and he became a different child overnight, like literally overnight.
Wow.
Yeah. So that can be missed even when you're a professional like I am.
You just don't think about it. You just don't think about a first grader having sleep apnea.
No, and this is rampant. So back in the olden days, just to give you a little history on this, like all of our parents had their tonsils out. That was just standard operating procedure, right? And then my generation, none of us have our tonsils out. So the pendulum just swung from, like you may remember as a kid watching the Brady Bunch. Yeah. The Brady Bunch kids got their tonsils out, and they would eat ice cream for a week, right? Mm-hmm. I'm growing up and I'm thinking, well, when do I get to eat ice cream for a week? Right? And we didn't. So it just completely changed. And now we have all sorts of different problems that they never had. And you say, well, there's a lot of different things involved there. But my kind of paradigm is, if in doubt, get your kid tested. It's a test for sleep apnea for a child. The bummer is, so if someone's listening to this right now and they're like, oh my gosh, yeah. So in kids, it's if they grind their teeth, if they snore at all, I would get my kid tested. It's not cute. That's just like daddy. That's weird. Okay, kids shouldn't snore when they sleep. Wetting the bed, diagnosis of ADHD, which again is just based on behavioral issues. There's no blood test for ADHD or an X-ray. It's just kind of a subjective thing. I think those are the main ones. Night terrors. There's a whole list of things that can be going on in these kiddos.
And when you do that test, it's conclusive, I'm assuming.
Correct.
Like you either know or you either have that or you don't.
Correct. And my suggestion is that you refer, or you kind of almost demand a referral to a pediatric sleep doctor. Now, again, depending on where a listener might be here, they're like, yeah, no, I don't have one of those. So they might have to travel a bit. Might have to go to Seattle, or here in Salt Lake, we have several pediatric sleep doctors. In Boise, we have pediatric sleep doctors. So they're going to be these, but they're not in every little town is going to have a pediatric sleep doctor. That's a relatively specialized specialty, right? But that's what I would do, because if you go and talk to a pediatrician, they'll blow it off. They'll be like, no, those tonsils aren't so big. I've seen 10 people today that are worse than that. And that may be. But again, if it's my kid, before I put my kid on speed. So Ritalin for ADHD, that's street name speed. So before I could put my kid on speed, they're getting a sleep study. If they don't have sleep apnea, great. Let's look at other options and counseling and teaching skills and things like that. But if they do, again, what do you think the brain cares more about? Good school performance or breathing? So
Yeah.
So thank you for asking me that.
Yes, of course.
Well, and that's it's kind of vulnerable to say, yeah, I'm a specialist in this, and my own son was dealing with it and I didn't know. So if you miss it, most of, if not all of us would miss it.
And it's so sad to me too, because it changes the trajectory of the kid's life, right? Those years are so important. And what happens to a child when they're in first, second, third grade, and they have so nowadays, so back when I was a kid, they would have just said, if this would have happened to me, they would have said, Mr. and Mrs. Spencer, your son Jamison's dumb. So we're going to put him with the other dumb kids, right? I mean, that's kind of the way it would have worked.
Yeah, you went to resource classes.
You went to resource classes. Yeah. You're now it's better, but it's still obvious. So when Jefferson was in first grade, so he had to kind of redo that year of kindergarten. It was like kindergarten 2.0. And then throughout his grade school career, there was that special person who would come in and work with Jefferson on certain things. Again, it doesn't, the other little kids recognize there's something different, that this little boy has to have, Mrs. Johnson come in every time we're reading and he goes over here. So that kind of sets you up as, I'm dumb. I'm not like these other kids. That sucks. And just completely changes the trajectory. I'm sure on this podcast before you've talked about mindset issues and limiting beliefs, things like this. Well, that's a whopper of a limiting belief. If you're like, well, yeah, I am not good at that. I'm not good at school things. I'm not good at these things. So I'm kind of passionate about people getting that tested. And like I said, it's an instant change. It's not, you do this and they get better over time. It's like, imagine if you weren't sleeping well for years and then all of a sudden you were. There's an immediate change. Again, one of my missions is to help more, not just dentists, but everybody recognize that, hey, this could be what's going on. Because, I like to joke that if I'm ever made Surgeon General, which is highly unlikely, I would make it the law that before a kid got put on Ritalin, they would have to have a sleep study. And we would instantaneously see literally thousands to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of kids being diagnosed with sleep apnea. Right now, the literature would say that only about 1% to 2% of kids have sleep apnea. But that's because we don't do huge studies where we just test a bunch of people for the fun of it. But it's not an invasive test. It's, they put on some wires and some straps on their chest and let them sleep. It's no big deal.
That's pretty valuable information. Something that I don't think anybody is on anybody's radar.
Yeah.
Right. So pediatric specialists, pediatric sleep
specialist. Yeah.
That's who you're.
And you could, if in your town, there's a sleep doctor in most, if you're listening to the United States anyway, most sleep labs you can self-refer. If you can't, let's say you've got TRICARE insurance, for example, in the United States, so you have to go through a gatekeeper. It's just going to be kind of the parent is going to have to be an advocate for their child and make a case for like, no, I kind of demand this. And if you don't mind, just a quick story on that. So kind of the rest of the story is, so we have Jefferson's tonsils and adenoids removed. So here's another thing that most people would not catch. Adenoids are the tonsils at the back of your nose. And they are, not to be too gross here, but they're scraped off as opposed to the tonsils in the back of your throat that you can see. If you open your mouth wide and you can look back there and see those are in a capsule. So they can actually be completely removed. Those tonsils never grow back. Your adenoids can grow back. It's like taking a weed out, but you didn't get the root. So we are back in North Carolina at the time. Jeff's 12 years old at this point, and we're sitting watching a movie one night, and he's making this noise like that through his nose. And I'm like, Jeff, what are you doing? He's like, nothing. I'm like, don't do that. Stop it. Basically, you're bugging me, man.
Yeah,
right.
And so he's quiet, and his lips were together, and he's just breathing quietly. And then a few minutes later, with his lips together, he's like, Jeff, why are you doing that? So I'm like, oh crap, his adenoids have grown back. So fool me once, shame on me, right? So or shame on you. Yeah, fool me twice, shame on me. So I'm not going to get fooled again. So I get him back almost immediately to a friend of mine out there that was a pediatric sleep doctor. So what I was out there doing in North Carolina, I was connecting with physicians and dentists and whatnot. So I knew all the players. I get him into a guy I really respect, and sure enough, sleep apnea still. And it was just as bad as it was when he was 6 years old because those tissues had grown back. Now here, the rest of the story is not as awesome as I wish it was. So we move here. So we moved to Utah, North Ogden. And I just do a little research. And I'm like, well, I need to find some ear, nose, and throat doctor. We already had the diagnosis. Okay. And I take my son, Jeff, to an ENT in the Ogden area, and I won't say his name. He's a great guy, but this story won't make him sound like that great, so I won't say his name. So I walk in with Jeff, and there's a thing on the wall that there's like a membership certificate for the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. Now, not all ear, nose, and throat doctors would be members of that academy. So I'm thinking, oh, great, I got a guy who knows sleep apnea. There's also a brochure there for something called Inspire, which is this surgical treatment for sleep apnea. So again, I'm thinking, dude, I got the guy. I scored here. I really didn't do that much research, but I got lucky. He comes in and we're talking, and I hand him my child's sleep study. And much to my chagrin, he kind of flips through the data of it, kind of goes to the bottom line. And my son had what's called an AHI. That's the apnea-hypopnea index. It's how many times you stop breathing, so to speak, per hour. And it was 4.5. And he looks at that and he says, well, when the AHI is below 5, we basically consider that normal. And if you would have seen me, you would have seen all the blood just drain out of my face. And I looked at him and I said, well, in adults we do. Because in adults, an AHI below 5 is considered normal, although I will debate that. I think that's dumb, and I know the people, actually, believe it or not. I know the guys who came up with those terms, and they're very arbitrary. So I would debate that if that's normal or not. But in kids, an AHI over 1 is considered abnormal. Over 5 is considered severe, as a matter of fact. So 4.5 in a child is bad. And so I had to say, well, in adults we do. And then he backtracked and goes, oh, yeah, in adults we do. I was like, oh, shoot, I know more than this guy does. And that's not to kind of put me out there, but so then, and I had to literally talk him into looking in his nose to see if the adenoids had grown back, because he was thinking it was allergies, which made no sense because we just moved from North Carolina. Right. So we just moved from someplace where,
allergies are off the charts.
Of course. Yeah. In North Carolina, and now to the desert. But I went through with it. I had them poke Jefferson with 1 million different needles to test him for every flora and fauna of Utah. And guess what? He wasn't allergic to any of them. So he ended up having his adenoids removed again. And literally, once again, overnight, he's a different kid. It was crazy. And at that point, too, at 12, 13 years old, you would have known him then. That's right. When we moved in, and he was a little bit chubby. He was self-conscious about that because all of his brothers are very skinny. And he was kind of chubby, and then he grew like a foot, and he's now taller than his just older than him brother, and is kind of really filled out and stuff. And that has to do with, again, sleeping. He just wasn't sleeping right. His body wasn't producing the growth hormone like it should at that age, of puberty and whatnot. It was amazing. Yeah.
Makes me want to get all my kids tested just in case.
No, seriously. So and
watch them at night while they're sleeping.
And I like to say, so my youngest child, Jared, we were camping once. We were sleeping near each other. He was snoring. So boom. So Jared is just precocious. He's like brilliant on everything and read faster than any of our kids and all this sort of stuff. So I wasn't concerned about the academic stuff with him, but just because he snored, I'm like, hey, not going to happen with 2 kids here. We get him a sleep study and it's normal. It was fine. Okay. And then, as I like to joke, my 4 older kids were already too screwed up. There was nothing I could do about it.
Well, it just makes you think, because I think as parents, we all worry about, our kids, and they all have strengths and weaknesses. And we hear many stories about how we didn't catch something, or if we would have caught something, or we finally caught something. And, whether it has to do with sleep apnea or a mental health issue or a physical health issue that we just didn't understand what it was, or that it was there. One of the things as parents, it's kind of hard to know.
Yeah.
It's like, is it a conversation? Can I get it out of them, how they're feeling? Do I, go for checkups on a regular basis or more often? And, a lot of doctors, normal family doctors are not going to go through some kind of comprehensive review. So Any thoughts on that? Like, how does we as parents try to like catch these things?
Yeah, lucky for us nowadays, we do have a lot of resources, and I know it can be confusing to kind of like hit the internet and be like, oh my goodness, and you can go down rabbit holes really easily.
Everything's some problem on the internet.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. And however, there's truth out there.
Yeah.
And when you start seeing like, okay, they've got this and this and this and this and this and this, then what I think is, well, is there an objective test? All right. So if it was like, well, your kid has whatever, and here's all of the signs and symptoms, and then it's like, okay, well, however, is there any objective test for that? No, it's just based on whatever, a lot of other people. So there's in medicine, we call it syndromes. Actually, TMJ is often referred to as TMJ syndrome. Whenever you hear the word syndrome, that means a lot of people have this thing and we don't know why. Okay. We don't understand the etiology. We don't understand anything. We just know a lot of people have this, like chronic fatigue syndrome, for example. With chronic fatigue syndrome, you would think getting a sleep study would be important, right? No, it's all based on subjective. Here's what you've told me. Here's what you have. So whenever you can find an objective study, that's what I'm all about. Like, for example, with COVID and stuff like that, there's a lot of evidence out there that vitamin D levels were related to negative outcomes. And almost everybody in North America has low vitamin D, almost everybody. Well, there's a blood test for that. So you can go and you can get a blood test. You can kind of check that stuff out. So like you said, though, it's rare. I mean, it'd be darn rare for any child to get blood tests where they are going through everything, but you could do it. That's a beauty that we have nowadays is you can get on, there's ULTA labs. You order these things yourself. Like I just did this recently, got my vitamin D levels and other levels checked again. It's a gift I've given to my kids is, hey, here, go get these blood tests. I've done some, what might seem weird. I'll share this with you just to kind of get a little bit of my personality here, but there's other things with your microbiome, like what's going on in your gut. Yeah. Okay. Well, you know how you test that? Like a stool sample. So for
happy birthday
for Christmas, it was Christmas. So for That's Christmas awesome. A couple of years ago, I gave all of my kids this stool sample thing where they send it in and then it gives you, here's your sensitivities, your dietary sensitivities. Here's, things that you should eat. Here's things you shouldn't eat.
That's
it was
huge.
Super cool. And they were all different. And that kind of spins into another thing here from the books we were talking about and stuff. And I was talking to Kirk about this. All of my kids have had the DISC profile. All of my kids have had the Myers-Briggs profile. And then the Tony Robbins thing, which is called the 6 Human Needs. And actually, even on my laptop, I brought this, but my wife and daughter have built this page where we have all of our DISC dots. We have our Myers-Briggs, INSJ, whatever, and we have the 6 human needs in order. And so we use these tools all the time, and it's twofold. One, for them to learn a little bit more about their own personalities. And I think actually more importantly, for all the rest of us to get a view into their personalities. But then something I'm quick to add, and this is what I teach to the dentist I coach too. You are not your DISC dot. You are not your Myers-Briggs. You are not your 6 human needs. You're more than that.
And those change over time.
And they change over time. That's right. I used to be high I, and I still am. I spend a lot of time in that influencer mode, but I'm hard D, right? I'm hard dominance on my DISC profile, but I know how to influence people too. And so they will change over time. But I with our kids at Christmas time, actually getting ready for kind of New Year's resolutions and whatnot. We all got together, had this, we call it our Spencer Family Summit, and got together, went through the Myers-Briggs stuff. And it was fun, right? Because we go through the weaknesses and the strengths, and we're all having a good time on the weaknesses. Here's Dad's weaknesses. And they're like, oh yeah, that's for sure. Dad doesn't communicate well on that, and he's hard-headed and whatever. And we go through all that and have a good laugh. And then at the end of it though, I said, hey, it says in the scriptures that your weaknesses can become strengths. And I believe that for most people, how weaknesses become strengths is you recognize them. It's not necessarily that it's taken away from you. Sometimes it might be. But for my kids, I'm like, hey, it's not a weakness if you recognize it's a weakness. If you're like, hey, I'm not very emotionally connected, for example. I'm not, like, for example, in the Myers-Briggs, in my personality, it literally says is, quote, romantically clueless. Okay. So there you go. And I could just
Your
say,
wife's probably laughing.
yeah,
right
exactly.
now.
Yeah. And she's like, yeah, that seems like him.
I don't know. Anybody that plans a month-long cruise in Europe for their 30th anniversary's got something going.
Well, I think I just have to work at it though. So that's the thing, is I could just say, well, that's what I am. And I think that's total bullcrap. It's weird because I'm not necessarily a huge fan of personality tests for that reason. If somebody's like, well, this is who I am. Mm-hmm. No, it's who you are right now. It's who you are manifesting, if you will, but you're in control. I really believe that I can be anything, and all of my kids can be anything they want. But when I recognize, all right, this is not natural for me, so I need to work at it a little bit.
Yeah, it just tells you what you're more natural at.
Right.
Yeah, but it helps, and I haven't thought about this until you brought this up, Jamison. It helps when you are giving the people that you're around the most an insight into how you think. And, I went through all of that stuff in college, and it was in the sales classes of, if you're doing this and you're selling to a guy who's a dominant D, make the sale quick, give him all the stuff he needs to know and get him out. Right.
Yep.
And you've got to be able to identify what those are. Well, not everybody's really good at identifying those, especially kids.
Yes.
So if hey, if you want something from mom, this is the way you ask her, and she's going to enjoy it a lot more because she's going to get asked the way she wants to, but you're probably also going to get what you wanted because you asked in the right way.
Yes.
My wife is really good at that. She'll say, do you want to ask that a different way? But doing that's a great program that you can do as a family, like sit down, and these things are not expensive. You can go into some of them that are expensive, but you can do the basic personality profile tests for DISC, or you can know what your personalities are going in. And then the people that you spend the most time with, we do it all the time in companies, but we don't often talk about doing it in a family. It's a great idea.
We do a handwriting analysis that creates a personality profile. I don't know if you've heard of those.
Yeah.
But we do that as a company
that's
with
cool.
a lot of different people, like before we hire them, or if we've got groups of teams that are working together and want to understand each other better. And I've often thought to myself, I got to have my kids do that. But it's so fun to know yourself better, to talk about your personality, to have those that you know and especially love understand you better.
Right.
So I think any family that did whatever it is, the DISC test, the Myers-Briggs, a combination, this handwriting that we do. I think that's a very healthy thing for a family to do. But I like what you said. It doesn't define who you are.
Correct.
It just kind of tells people your tendencies.
Yep.
Right?
And the nice thing about all those, so Myers-Briggs, there's the free one. It's at 16personalities.com.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
free. The thing I like about how they do it too is they're very positive. So there's not like one of the personalities is like, hey, you're a jerk. You're just a super jerk. Get used to being a jerk.
Right.
They're all, because my personality is like, it could definitely say that you're a bit of a jerk. You don't care about people. You're just, task oriented, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't do that. It says, hey, you're a leader, you're this. It makes everything very positive, and then kind of swings over to hey, here's some of the tendencies that you might need to think about, you might need to work on. So for a family, that's great. Because like you're saying in business, we can choose who's around us.
Yeah.
And you can decide, I don't like that person for whatever reason, and they're gone, right? Harder to do with your kids if you're like, I just don't like your personality. True. We're going to get you another family.
Yeah, absolutely true.
Well, in business sometimes too, I actually will surround teams with different personalities. Like we always want to hire people who are like us. Right? It takes discipline to say, actually, if I hire someone like me, that's a mistake.
Yep.
I should hire someone different than me.
Yep.
And so at the family level, it may be good to just explain to your family, hey, our differences make this family stronger, not weaker. If we were all the same, we wouldn't be as strong. We wouldn't be able to see different points of view and different paradigms. And so I think that's really cool. I'm going to do that with my family now that you brought that up. I
think you'll enjoy it. And there's that whole nature versus nurture type of debate, right? And this kind of throws that away to a degree because a very similar parenting style. Jennie and I, we haven't changed dramatically. We do change, as you have more kids or different stages in life. But still, you can have these kids with almost polar opposite personalities in the same household. So it's made a huge difference. It was just a few months ago that we did that. And I literally can say it's made a huge difference in our family in how our children look at each other. And again, how it's not like, okay, well, yeah, Jared is just kind of weird in this one way. It's, well, no, Jared is super introspective. He's super introverted. He's super smart. He doesn't care about these other things over here. Very different than Jefferson. So for them to recognize those things, and also for our children to recognize that their weaknesses aren't weaknesses unless they let them be.
Yeah, it creates understanding and empathy.
Yeah, correct.
Right? When you understand how someone ticks, you have a lot more empathy for who they are and maybe some of their idiosyncrasies.
Yeah. And I think even like you mentioned your wife, it's helped my boys, particularly my son Jack, interact better with his mom, because my son Jack is my most similar child to me. I think all of our biological children all are unique in their personalities, and Jennie and I are different, of course. And then I have 3 bonus children. I have 3. I have 2 daughters-in-law and 1 son-in-law, and I think that there might be one of them that is the same. But there's 12 personalities, or 16 personalities, I guess. That's why it's called 6personalities.com. 16 personalities, and I think we've got 11 of them or something like that in our family. And that, again, that's been very, very, very helpful to do that. And we're doing it also with our staff. We do it all with the doctors that we bring in now. Cool. We've done the DISC forever, but the DISC, of course, is communication. So you're going to communicate in a dominant way. You're going to communicate in an influencing way. You're going to be, SC, whatever. Whereas the Myers-Briggs is kind of more, this is how you tick. And then how you communicate depends, right?
So Jamison, you've got this massive library, and I could tell what type of personality you were when I went into your library, because books are everywhere and it's just like this power office of information. So I want to ask you, if you had a couple of books to give a recommendation to our listening audience, what books have made the most impact in your life, and what lessons have those taught you that you've then passed on to your kids?
Yeah, thanks. And there was a lot of clutter there too, by the way. So
it was a beautiful office. It's a beautiful office.
Kirk actually told me after that, he's like, yeah, I could tell after just being in your office that you were on the DISC profile. You were D and then I and then S and then C in that order. And I'd never heard anyone say that before. So that's pretty cool.
I nailed it.
You definitely nailed it. That's for sure. Well,
and I have the benefit of knowing you too.
Yeah. So, books wise, some of the books that I've read in the last few years that have made a big difference: The Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, I think it is. That was a huge one for me and my family. That's another one that we had our kids read, because it's all about it's your fault, basically. Take ownership of it. We use that with our teams, in our practices, and have them read it, so that our teams recognize, well, no, it's not the doctor, it's me. If there's a problem, it's me. I need to get the training, I need to get the whatever. So Extreme Ownership, I think, was awesome. Atomic Habits, I really loved, by James Clear, and I know you guys have talked about that. The little funny thing that I think about that is he spends the first couple chapters talking about how goals are stupid, and then he spends the rest of the book telling you how to set goals. So I think that's kind of funny. But he is making that distinction between a goal versus a habit. And habits are, of course, where we're going to really get somewhere. Start with Why by Simon Sinek is super. And again, my little joke on that too is you can't start with why. It's impossible. You have to start with what. But the thing that a lot of people mistake is they don't ask why. Classic example of that is, I want to run a marathon. Well, do you really? Well, no, I want to be healthy. And people will do this what, and then they get involved in it. And like with the marathon example, they get into running 20 miles on Saturday, and then their knees give out or something, like, oh, well, that stinks. And if they haven't really figured out their why, then they're going to fail because they'll just have to give up. 12-Week Year by Brian Moran. That one really changed my life significantly, because I'd been doing the annual goals, and I still will to a degree, but doing 12-week segments quarterly. So now I have quarterly goals. And the big difference is you can't let off the gas. you've only got 12 weeks. Yeah, I mentioned this in a thing that I taught the other day, that when we do annual goals, we start off in January and we almost immediately stop any forward action on our goal, but we think to ourselves, well, I got a year, right? I'm fine. And then, June comes, we're like, well, dang, I better get going on that goal, right? And then it's October and you're like, well, I've run out of time. So you don't do anything. So the 12-week year, I think, is huge.
That's cool. I'll have to read that one.
Yeah, we used to use that one in the financial services because the last week of the year was the highest producing week of the entire agency. And the owner looked at it and said, why can't we do this every quarter? I know you guys have got stuff in the pipeline, but come on, like when everything's on the line and you've got to, validate your contract, right, or you've got to qualify to go on a big trip. Yep. Everybody just, oh man, I got a deadline. That's so right. We did the 12-week year and we made deadlines throughout the year, and it did make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And then kind of the principles too. And I've gotten these from a million different books. Matter of fact, a book by Michael Hyatt, Your Best Year Ever, goes and takes a lot of these principles and puts them together. But the big one in Your Best Year Ever is the abundance mindset, being in control of your reactions and attitude, and then also gratitude, coming from a place of gratitude in all of these things. And then, something that just came up this weekend, I mentioned we had this awards ceremony for our dentists that we coach. And one of them who had won last year, and this year she came in second. And she left the celebration feeling a little bit deflated, and then goes back to her team. And her team, so on Monday of this week, I get these texts like, hey, my team wants to know, where were we at in the different categories? What could we do to improve? And I'm like, I think you're kind of thinking about this different, because the way I've set up the game, it awards people for increased production. It awards them for growth in their practice, but it's different variables. So I can have somebody that's just getting started and they can kind of compete with someone who's been doing it for years. And there's a lot of things in this contest, if you will, that you're not in control of. I talked to her about defining the win. She said to me, she says, my team doesn't feel like they won second. They feel like they lost first. And that stinks. So I think we do that to ourselves a lot. And the kids can do this in particular, that they will set up and define what a win is. And if they don't win based on that definition, then they feel terrible. Whereas the good news is it's completely in our control. I had a goal to run the Boston Marathon. And if you know anything about that stuff, you have to run a certain time based on your age. And they kept moving the goalposts on me because I was going to turn 50, and that should have given me 5 more minutes, but it didn't. The year I turned 50, they dialed it back because there were so many people that were so good. So it kept the same. So the pace that I had to run from 45 will now be all the way to 55, but I did it. So I was able to, the first time I qualified for Boston, I ran just about a minute faster than the time. And then what happens, that allows you to register for Boston. Okay. And I didn't make the cut because they only have 30,000 runners. So I qualified for Boston, but I didn't make the cut. So I didn't get to run in Boston. So then I was like, okay, I achieved my initial goal. I qualified for Boston, but I really want to run Boston. So that meant I needed to run faster. So I run a couple more marathons and I did it. So I achieved that goal of being able to not only register for Boston, but I got accepted to run in the Boston Marathon in 2020. Which of course was canceled. So I got to do a virtual Boston Marathon, which is nothing like a Boston Marathon.
I'm sure it's not.
One of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, actually, is I ran a marathon completely by myself. My family, like my son Jefferson, rode by my side on his bicycle, and would give me water bottles and stuff like that, but no aid stations. The Boston Marathon is basically lined the entire 26.2 miles. And none of that is all me. And I'd never run 26.2 miles basically by myself before. And that was really, really hard. But had I defined that my win was to run in Boston, then I lost. But I didn't. My goal was to achieve that ability that I could run, and I did. And that's kind of the thing that I'm trying to teach my kids now too, is set and my business, the dentist that I work with, I told this dentist who felt that they'd lost, I said, hey, well, this year you define the win. if we have this production, if we have this growth, if we help, because in my practice in sleep and TMD, all of our business goals relate to how many people we help. You know, we're not in teeth bleaching and stuff like that. We're not cosmetic dentists. We're saving lives.
Right.
My goal in my practice is I'm adding 100 million years of life lived with vitality to planet Earth.
Oh, that's a good one.
It seems like a big number, right?
That's a good why, though.
That's my why.
Yeah,
that 100 million years, that's a lot, right? But all that is I want to help 10,000 dentists, each help 1,000 people live on average 10 years longer with life lived with vitality. That adds up to 100 million years. So that's what I'm doing. And so I help that dentist see it's like, hey, set up your goals and then say, hey, if we make this big, hairy, audacious goal, then 25 grand and we'll go do some awesome trip. And then I'm like, and then if you happen to win the prize of the Spencer Study Club thing, then it's on me. But either way, you win. So you reached your goal. One way you're going to pay for it, but so what? You know, you set up the standards to win. And if it happens to be that this more arbitrary thing that you're part of over here that has a lot of moving parts that you can't control, if you win that, great. If you don't, so what? You still won. So define the win. Define the win that you can actually win.
I like that.
Love it. Thanks for imparting us with your thoughts and wisdom.
My pleasure.
We do always end the podcast with one question, and that is, what does it mean to you to be a gentleman? So we'll let you answer that one.
Well, thank you. So I anticipated you were going to ask me that, so I thought a lot about it, as a matter of fact, and looked at even the dictionary definition, which probably maybe others have or y'all have. So the Webster dictionary is a gentleman, goes to that word gentle or genteel. Yes. Yep. It's of noble birth. And this goes back to nobility, meaning, you know, that you were born into that noble birth that made you a gentleman. And now we've expanded that term to ladies and gentlemen, right? So any dude could be a gentleman in that. But I like going back to that original definition. And that noble birth, though, is everybody. So everybody is a child of God. Everybody is of noble birth, and it's just up to us if we live up to that birthright or not. Mm-hmm. We're all gentlemen in that sense, but whether or not we live up to it, that's up to us.
That might be one of my favorites. Yeah, that's a good answer.
I get too.
Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Jamison. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. If you loved the podcast today, please share it with somebody that you know, that you love, especially if it's somebody that you thought of while you were listening to the podcast that might be suffering from sleep apnea or something like that. That is a serious disease that does need to be taken care of. And reach out to the professionals in your area and get that taken care of. Thank you, Jamison, for being with us and imparting that knowledge. It's very unique and very targeted knowledge, but hopefully it provides value to somebody that's listened to the podcast today. So I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Cory Moore. Each of you are of noble birth. Make it a great one.